Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sparks. Good morning. Please be seated. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Welcome to this wonderful conference. My name is Marcel Scherer. I am the Deputy Director in Las Vegas for the Department of Business and Industry. It is a great pleasure to extend to each of you a very warm welcome on behalf of the Director of Business and Industry, Bruce Breslow, and our team to this very unique gathering, our 6th annual conference, Governors Conference on Business. Among the activities we have planned today is this presentation of the Internet of Things, commonly referred as IoT. And this morning, all I could think about was the Jensens. I don't know, many of you probably remember that. 1962, my goodness, 55 years ago, this futuristic family living in space. But I kept wondering that we don't need to be in a space. With the Internet of Things, I think we bring space into today's lives, into our communities. And one of the things also that I kept thinking is, oh my goodness, it relates also to the Flintstone, another of my favorite cartoons. They live in a world with machines powered by, and many of you will know this, dinosaurs and birds. And of course the Jensens live in a world with robotics, holograms, and innovation. So welcome. This is not Orbit City, but this is the city, a wonderful city of Sparks. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Marty Skolnick to you from Siemens. He is going to be our presenter for the Internet of Things this morning. And I don't think we cannot think of a person best suited to help us experience the Internet of Things. This morning I was just interacting with Marty, and he was telling me that he used to live here in the area, specifically Lake Tahoe, our wonderful and beloved Lake Tahoe area. So it's always great, Marty, to have a friend joining us that knows this area and have a passion for everything that we do in Northern Nevada. I know that you have a wonderful resume, and you're going to be sharing some of the ideas. So without any further ado, let us prepare to be challenged and inspired by this wonderful presentation of what we call the Internet of Things, as Marty will say, the Internet of everything nowadays. So please help me welcome Marty Skolnick from Siemens.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for allowing me to be here. I did live in Lake Tahoe. It was in the 1970s, so that will give you an indication of my age. Love the area, though. I want to talk about Internet of Things, or Internet of Everything, as Marcel said. Anybody in the room familiar with the term IoT? You guys are really good students. Everybody just automatically raised your hands. Does anybody have an IoT device with them today? Anybody have a smartphone in their pocket or purse? Okay, that is the most prevalent IoT device on the planet today. So let's talk about that a little bit. 92% of United States adults own smartphones, and that's an IoT device. And we'll get into that in a little bit of more detail, but shouldn't we be the eyes and ears of our community, of our city, of our roadways, kind of like a human ongoing factor of the app Waze? And we have all of the technology inherent to do that. We're just not acting and performing that way right now. So there are more objects, more connected objects connected to the internet than there are people on the planet today. By 2020, it's projected that there'll be 40 billion connected IoT devices in the world. Today, there's somewhere around 3 billion. So that is phenomenal growth. I like to say there's two really, truly blue ocean businesses in America today, and one of them is IoT and the other one is cannabis. And I can say that in Nevada, right? I'm from Colorado, so I can say it there as well. So the IoT business is truly blue ocean. It's moving at an incredible pace. It is affecting our lives on a daily basis in ways that, quite frankly, we don't even know it's affecting us. I want to talk about the third wave. There is a book on the market. I am not a book salesperson, but there's a book on the market. If you're interested in IoT, it is one of the best explanations of IoT in lay terms. It's written by Steve Case, the ex-CEO and chairman of AOL Time Warner. He calls it the third wave. I'm looking out at the audience, and there are a lot of us that will remember what I'm about to tell you, and there's some that won't. So the first wave of the internet was back in the 1970s and early 1980s when there was a 7-year court case which ultimately allowed us as consumers to use the incumbent telco's copper to dial up to the internet. Many of you remember that. We went out and purchased an overly expensive 300 or 600 baud modem, and we dialed in, and there was really not much on the internet, but we exchanged information on bulletin boards and hopefully nothing more nefarious than that, but I'll leave it at that. The second wave of the internet is really where we are today, and that's broadband connectivity, and many of us in urban areas have it. Unfortunately, many of us in rural areas do not have broadband, but it's connectivity to the internet, to websites, doing things like streaming music and streaming videos and doing online shopping and hit the button on Amazon and buy what you want. That's the second wave of the internet. Both the first wave and the second wave are us as consumers or us as humans connecting with the internet. The third wave is IoT, and IoT is the internet connecting with us, right? That is a fundamental difference. If you get notifications on your smartphone of emergency situations occurring within the community or traffic situations, that's IoT. That's the internet connecting with you, and that is without a doubt the wave of the future. So I'm going to talk about, so what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about an introduction to IoT, talk about how IoT works at not a very technical level, talk about growth projections within IoT, and then unfortunately I'd like to end with challenges of IoT. And this is a pretty involved conversation, not intended to scare anybody, but quite frankly it's the world that we live in today with IoT. Us as governmental officials, research officials, educators, citizens, entrepreneurs, and business leaders, these are the things, the challenges that we need to think about and we need to consider today because it's our reality. So a little bit on an introduction. Here's a civic scene, any particular street in any urban area. And here today are the IoT devices that populate that area. We may not see them, we may not even know they exist, but they are there. There's a quote-unquote smart city development that's about to occur in the Reno market. It's West 2nd Street. I'm sure anybody from the Reno area has heard about it. It hasn't kicked off yet, but this is their vision. That's not the picture of that development, but this is their vision. So you have occupancy sensors, temperature sensors, light sensors, of course autonomous vehicle sensing. All the way at the top you have air quality sensors, so that constituents and citizens know what the air quality is at any given point in time. Trash compactors, I'll get back to that in a few minutes. Ultra high-speed public Wi-Fi, right? These are all IoT enabling devices and IoT devices, and they're surrounding us on a daily basis. We just may not know that they're there. So this eye chart is really intended to give you an idea of what the landscape of IoT looked like in 2016. These are the industry sectors of IoT, and these are the major worldwide companies involved in IoT in 2016. If we were to take the snapshot literally 12 months later, it wouldn't fit on one screen. That's how many people are involved in this industry. It is an incredibly fast-moving industry, developments on an hourly basis, a daily basis. I was sharing with Marcel earlier, I was invited last month to go to Washington, D.C. and give a presentation to a number of senators on IoT. And I was actually really felt privileged to do that, and I felt honored that our leaders in Washington, D.C. saw the trend in IoT and recognized that they needed to learn more about it. The final question that they asked in the session was interesting, and it was, what can the federal government do to help regulate IoT? That's a scary question, right? Without getting too political, we can't even get out of our own way in other fundamental issues of government. IoT is moving at 1,000 miles an hour. Government moves at slightly slower than a snail's pace. The two of them don't really fit together right now, and I'll come back to that as a challenge of IoT. So what are some of the applications that we might see on a regular basis? And quite frankly, the applications are endless and they change on a daily basis. But IoT started about 10 years ago, and the Internet of Things, or as Marcel said, the Internet of Everything, which what Steve Case calls it in the book, The Third Wave, started about 10 years ago in the industrial sector. IoT, or IoE, was really developed to help industry and utilities put remote sensors on equipment to do predictive analysis. So from an industrial perspective, there are a lot of very sophisticated IoT devices that we as consumers and citizens will never see that help predict equipment failures. And many of those are on this list. So position, presence, proximity, motion, velocity, displacement, that's all equipment related stuff. One of the big trends we're seeing in the Internet of Everything, or IoT, is health monitoring and voice activation. From a consumer level, those are really, really prevalent things. I'll give you an example of health monitoring. We as an organization, Siemens as an organization, have been asked to build an experimental home in the Orlando, Florida market, and the experimental home, the concept is that a person that lives in that home will be able to do health monitoring on a regular basis and will be full-time connected to their healthcare provider. So glucose monitoring, urine analysis, fecal monitoring. It even goes so far, I see some grimaces out there. Yeah. But, so let me ask you, even though you're grimacing, if it allowed you as an aging adult to stay in your home for another 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, would you grimace? It's a personal choice, right? So in that home, the appliances are monitored through IoT. So as you shop online for your groceries come to your doorstep, you scan those as they go into the refrigerator. Your health is being monitored, your pulse, your sleep habits, your glucose, your urinalysis, and as you pull things out of the refrigerator, your counter will pop up with live displays of menus for the things that are in your refrigerator that are most appropriate for your personal health condition at that time. And then the monitoring can sense whether you ran out to 7-Eleven and had ding-dongs instead of what's in your refrigerator. But so utility monitoring, I know there's some utility people in the room. There is probably one of the greatest areas of IoT explosion is in utility monitoring. I'll give you an example of that. Today, most of us consume electrical, natural gas, and water, and we know that we need to conserve and we know that we need to use less, but we really don't know the impact of that until we get that bill 30 days later, and then we kind of head in hands as, why did I do that? What if, as consumers from the utility company, we had real-time vision of what our electric, natural gas, and water consumption was, and what if our apps were able to predict our behavioral patterns and translate that into monetized utility usage? Would that change your utility behaviors? And I tell the story that I live in a house of 2, we're empty nesters. It would change one of our behavioral habits, not the other one. So we've got that ongoing battle. That's just a reality. So let's talk about some, through the industry, some typical IoT devices or Internet of Everything devices. Hopefully most of these look familiar to the crowd. We've got an IoT thermostat. We've got a voice assist. Voice assist is one of the fastest growing IoT devices on the consumer market, and it's for good reason. It's being widely marketed. It's a matter of convenience, and there's some challenges that go with that that we'll talk about. Wearable devices. Anybody in the room have a wearable device? Yeah, so maybe 10% of the people. And then smart outlets. So if you want to automate your home, or if you want your home to be fitted with IoT, the two most common devices are outlets and switches, right? So you can control things remotely. So maybe these are not as familiar, but they probably are. And these are example of commercial IoT devices. Parking sensors. So where IoT is going in the smart city space is that we will have smart and intelligent parking. So let's say you're about to hop in your vehicle and you go downtown. You know it's a busy evening downtown in the urban center. You can reserve a parking spot. That sensor detects whether that parking spot is occupied or unoccupied and reserves it for you, as an example. It's called digital valet as a use case. Street lighting. I love this example. So I was at a conference a couple of months ago in a city in Southern California, which shall remain nameless. The conference was a smart city conference. They came up to me after the presentation and said, yeah, we're a smart city. I said, well, that's exciting. What did you guys do to transform yourself? They said, oh, we retrofitted the streetlights. Oh, okay. It goes a little farther than that. But one of the really interesting things about streetlights and IoT is that most municipalities around the nation, the streetlights are utility owned. And that's fine, but what that means is that pole and that arm and that fixture are an asset owned by the utility company, not by the community, and you can't use that asset to attach other devices like IoT devices, early warning, weather indications, security things like CCTV cameras and others. So what if the community or the municipality owned those streetlights and started using those poles as true assets for IoT? That's where we go relative to smart city, not changing the fixtures. Waste. Anybody familiar with that happens to be a product called Big Belly trash can. Anybody familiar with that? So the way the trash can works is people put refuse in the can. The can monitors when it needs to be compacted. It automatically compacts. It uses solar power to actually generate the power to do it. Uses an IoT device to contact the waste company when that can is full, so that you're only emptying the can when it's full. Simple, but very creative. And then, of course, traffic signaling, and we all love that. Industrial IoT devices. So these have been out for a long, long time, and these are the devices that we really don't see, but we depend on daily as part of our lives. So some examples are energy monitoring, and that goes back to what I just said about the utility company. What if we knew what our instantaneous use was industrially, commercially, and at the residential level? Would we change our behaviors based on that? Water meters, another great example. Equipment sensors, and these are really monitoring equipment to predict failures so that maintenance can occur before a failure occurs. And then BLE beacons. And I've got to apologize. Somebody pointed out to me yesterday, it was too late. Why does that beacon look like a Viagra tablet? I don't. Anybody familiar with BLE beacons? BLE beacon technology is an unbelievably fast emerging IoT technology. BLE is basically Bluetooth technology. Where we find beacons most prevalently today is in museums and retail areas. So if you've ever been in a retail area, maybe walked by a particular store 3 or 4 times and got a notification on your phone that there's a sale of some type happening, that's BLE beacons that are enabling that push notification, that technology. Probably in the next 5 years, BLE beacons will be everywhere in urban centers. They'll be used for traffic control, congestion control, pedestrian control, lighting control, that you will see beacons, not see them, but the beacons will be everywhere. And this one fascinates me because I come from a non-agricultural background. IoT is really making significant headway in agriculture. So on the left, you see a plant monitoring IoT device, and it's monitoring the growth and the moisture of that plant to predict when it needs either harvesting or watering. Equipment, you can't really see this picture, but the tractor is completely fitted out with IoT devices that are monitoring where it should go and when it should go, how deep it should plow, what the nutrient feed levels need to be in a particular sector of irrigated or plowed field, and then app-based planting. And app-based planting, any people from the agricultural sector in the room? Tractors of today are probably some of the highest tech devices in America, and most of us wouldn't even know it because we don't live in that environment. And then maturity sensing on this tomato plant. So it's measuring the size of the plant and the maturity of the plant so that it's harvested at the right time for shipping. Pretty interesting. So here's how IoT works. It's really thousands of IoT sensors and edge devices that continually transmit through cyber secure connections, hopefully, and information communications technology network to a cloud-based solution where business analytics are performed and information is pushed back down to consumers, again, hopefully through a cyber secure network in real time. So that's what it is. It changes our lives. I'm going to get a little bit technical here. I apologize for this eye chart, but this is really the basis of the IoT devices. On the left side is the device itself and the operating system within the device. Most IoT devices on the market communicate either on some type of wireless signal. 802.11 is the most common. LoRa is another really common network. Some communicate on cellular. It is predicted that when 5G comes out in 2019 that many IoT devices will convert to 5G because 5G communication is supposed to save our lives. I don't know if that's true or not. And then you've got some sensing devices below that. The next box over is the network, and this is how the IoT devices actually connect to a physical network, right? So you have an edge device layer and then a network layer, and that information is pushed up to the cloud, and the cloud information is hosted and then analyzed. And that analysis of that information is what's pushed back down to us as consumers or commercial or industrial users. There's a move afoot in the IT world right now to go from cloud to fog, and I think I have a slide on that. So historically, it's kind of an interesting story if you've lived long enough to see independent standalone machines. We went to dumber machines, but more intelligence in the cloud. The trend right now is to push that back down. So fog are servers that are more at the local level as opposed to a distant level like the cloud. There's another transition that is called MIST, and MIST is mist computing, which is at a very local level, like a building level or a block level or a campus level. And so you'll start hearing those terms relative to IoT as well. So here's some growth projections, and this is really phenomenal from a research standpoint as well as from a business standpoint, is the growth projections, and these little bubbles on the left side are number of devices broken up by market sector. The largest growth sector right now is in consumables, residential consumables, and it's phenomenal where that's going to go. So you hear about home automation or wearable technology relative to IoT, that's that bubble right there. The section on the right really talks to, this is the growth trend in IoT, this is where the predictions of 40 billion connected devices by the end of 2020 come in. So this is another subsection of growth, and this is their, McKinsey estimates that the potential for IoT in the marketplace by the year 2025 is an $11 trillion economic impact, which is just an absolutely staggering number for an industry that wasn't even in existence 10 years ago, right? That's where I said blue ocean business, cannabis, and IoT. This is where it comes from. So here's something that will feed into the challenges that we talk about in a few minutes. In 2018, it said that there'll be 180 zettabytes of data created through computing and IoT. In 2012, the global data generated was 2.7 zettabytes. So that's the growth in data. The question, are we in a position to handle that much data, and what do we do with that data? So as an example, anybody ever heard the term zettabyte? A zettabyte equals roughly 1 trillion gigabytes. So when you go out and you buy a gig phone, this is 1 trillion of those times 180. So it's a lot of information. Another growth projection is by 2020, there should be roughly $1 trillion in annual revenue generated by IoT, broken down by the subsets below. What's interesting to me is while there is significant growth in all of the sectors, the biggest growth sectors are home and consumer, back to the topic that we talked about a minute ago, and $270 billion in IoT growth in cities. And that means smart city type play, connected communities, connected developments. Today, we have almost no real smart cities in America, and so this is a really phenomenal growth number. Next slide, please. So this is how it's changing our lives, and I won't talk through each one of these, but it's changing and impacting our lives. IoT is at the home level, transportation level, health level, building levels, and city levels. So I want to jump to the next slide and talk in a little more detail. So the opportunity for IoT exists to fundamentally benefit and change our lives in a number of positive ways. And I just threw some concepts up here, but improving connectivity. So if IoT works in a mesh network technology, it has the potential of creating uninterruptible wireless networks for us to connect to. We don't currently have that in most urban centers. Enhancing mobility. It just makes us more fluid, right? That could be wayfinding. Improving responsiveness for public safety, which is a really big deal. Increasing collaboration, increasing safety for citizens. Reducing operational costs because we can do machine predictive analysis as opposed to dispatching humans to do preventive maintenance when it's not required. Coping with population growth. If we use IoT properly, particularly from the agricultural standpoint, it can really help with population growth, or at least dealing with population growth. Increasing access to services, improving energy efficiency and carbon footprint, reducing waste and addressing resiliency, which is a big issue in our networked world today. Managing scarcity of natural resources. Meeting the needs of our underserved populations, which is a really big deal as well. Managing the needs and connectivity of an aging population, back to creating an environment where people are able to stay in their homes and be productive for longer periods of time, and increasing immediate access to services. These are just literally off the top of my head that are thrown up there. So let's touch on a few of those. Improving mobility with IoT. Many of us use this today and we probably don't even think about it as an IoT connectivity. But mobility on demand, right? So that's Uber and Lyft. That's what we know today. That's mobility on demand. Universal payment platforms. I don't know if anybody in the room has experienced the e-wallet concept, but it's where you go to an environment, could be a casino, could be somewhere else. You never take your wallet out of your pocket. You're making selective payments electronically through IoT. Geofencing and notifications. This is currently used a lot in healthcare, particularly with dementia patients, where they might wear a bracelet of some type, and if they get beyond the geofenced area, the healthcare providers are warned so that people don't wander off. Wayfinding, traffic management, smart tourism, mobility marketplace, smart parking, electrified roadway. I'm going to touch on that. This is a fascinating subsection, to me anyway, fascinating subsection of autonomous driving. Electrified roadway is the concept that's being tested in a number of places around the United States right now, where semi-trucks, freight haulers are actually electric instead of diesel, and the roadway is electrified so that that freight hauler can conduct a mutual charging so that they don't have to stop other than to change drivers, right? So safety, pollution reduction, maintenance reduction, on and on. And there's a couple of experiments going on right now, one in Colorado and one in Utah with electrified roadway and freight management. Interesting story, there's a pilot project, government-funded grant, one in Denver and one in New York City, and the grant is using IoT devices to wayfind semi-trucks in the urban centers through an app. They pay, and it gets them on the interstate system faster. So it's actually doing traffic control to allow the freight haulers to get to the major transport arteries and out of the urban centers faster. So it's being billed as a public safety and pedestrian safety and traffic safety. It's also a revenue generating source for municipalities and states. Very interesting concept. Reducing traffic management, probably nobody in the room is interested in that, right? So autonomous driving, and I'm sure we all read articles about autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles are probably 5 to 7 years from being a daily consumer reality in our lives, particularly in urban centers. 5 to 7 years is a blink of an eye, at least for me it is. So what's IoT do there? And it's really vehicle-to-vehicle communication, right? That's pretty important for the vehicles to know where each other are. V2I, which is vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, and DSRC, which is dedicated short-range communication, all are vital to intelligent vehicles and autonomous driving. Connected freight, an example is what I just talked about in Denver and New York City. Traffic signaling prioritization. So imagine that you have thousands of autonomous vehicles on the road, and the system, the network knows that 85% of them are going one direction. Shouldn't the traffic signals be coordinated to allow that traffic to flow easier? That doesn't exist today very, very much in our world, but that's really where traffic management is going. Policy development programs. Major, major advancements in policy development relative to autonomous vehicles right now. We read about that in the newspapers and magazines. And then transportation electrification, which we talked about. Once electrified roadways through IoT are worked out for freight, that the next step is independent autonomous vehicles, right? So that autonomous vehicle can literally cycle endlessly through an urban network with an electrified grid. Making buildings high performers. So this is kind of interesting. Most commercial buildings, like the one we're in, have a certain amount of intelligence to them. They have building automation systems, fire, life safety systems, security systems, but those systems generally are not interconnected. IoT offers the opportunity in commercial buildings for the connection of those devices to make them responsive. One is predictive building analytics. This is very, very much along the same line as industry predictive analytics. Smart utility metering, we talked about that at a consumer level, but also very important at a commercial building. Safety improvements. One of the things, an example I can come up with is there are smoke detectors that have recently been introduced to the marketplace that contain BLE beacons. So in the event of a fire in that building, in addition to the first responders using the fireman's panel, traditional fireman's panel, they can also use an app and determine where people are in that building based on the location of the smart mobile devices. In addition to that, wayfinding and regress out of the building can be pushed to that smart mobile device. So we all check into a hotel. How many people actually look at the evacuation route on the back of the hotel door? Yeah, it's 1, 2, okay. 2 out of this crowd's not a very good number. What if that information was pushed to your mobile device and you literally just followed that path, right? How many lives could be saved? How many emergency situations could be overcome by doing that? Improve comfort. So right now buildings are controlled based on what we think is the right temperature. but it may not be the right temperature. Some of us might want it warmer, some of us might want it cooler, some of us may not work an 8 to 5 job. And what if that building was conditioned, your area was conditioned for you at the time you entered the building through geofencing? Carbon footprint reduction, artificial intelligence, lighting optimization programs, and back to emergency wayfinding. First responsiveness, and this is probably one of the largest growth areas again for IoT. We don't see a lot of this today, but there are a lot of advancements in the devices. And this really gets down to elements like road safety, video and audio detection. So currently today, most video CCTV systems on the highway or in buildings are relatively static systems. So information is recorded, but it requires an operator to watch what's going on to detect something out of the normal. The trend going on in that industry right now are artificial intelligence self-learning video management systems. So video management systems actually know what the normal course of behavior is within the sphere of a particular video lens, and will watch that activity. When something abnormal happens, then it will connect to the first responders so that they can actually connect to it, right? And that's all done through IoT. Crime prevention, connected freight, biomonitoring, facial recognition. Anybody ever been exposed to facial recognition that you know of? Right? Yep. So really coming on the market strong. We have done a lot of experiments with facial recognition systems. Probably the most advanced facial recognition systems on the market are coming out of Israel right now, for good reason. They need to protect themselves. But you literally walk down a hallway, if you have access, doors open, lights come on, whatever the case might be. Facial recognition is an interesting subset of IoT. Most of the systems actually read the iris pattern of your eye, right? They take a picture of it, certain number of pixels of a certain color of a certain size, and that's how it recognizes you. So safe rail crossings, and then Spot Shotter is actually an IoT device that recognizes active shooter events in a community. Not a great thing to talk about, but it's real. And then predictive traffic analytics. So I told you we would wrap this up with some challenges of IoT. The challenges are real, and they're presented before us, and quite frankly, the constituents represented in this room are the people that need to solve the problem. We have researchers, we have educators, we have government officials, we have entrepreneurs, and we have large global business leaders. It's our job to do it. Back to my Senate story. The federal government is probably not in a position to really do this. There are some industry alliances that are doing a good job or to a great job of doing it, but we need to be involved. So let's touch on a few of those. Cybersecurity. Last November, there was a cybersecurity attack that took down a number of prominent websites. The point of entry for the hackers was IoT devices that had out-of-the-box default username and password, right? How many people do that with your home wireless network, with your mobile device? Why would we do it with IoT devices? But that was the point of entry. Took global websites down for the better part of a day. Personal identifiable information. And this one is really, for some reason, I'm fascinated by this. So anybody that's wearing a fitness wearable device, chances are really good when you bought that device, you registered your name, your information, your telephone number, possibly a credit card with that company, and you are transmitting your own personal physiological information to that company. And when you accepted the EULA, the End User License Agreement, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably didn't read, you committed, right? Has anybody ever read a EULA for an app? Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, the lawyers write them, right? So what you committed to, probably, is that you no longer have ownership of your personal physiological information. This will probably be the biggest changing trend in IoT in the next 5 years. We saw in some of the slides that the biggest growth sector for IoT is at the residential and consumable level. Most of us are voluntarily giving that information away. So when you talk into a voice activation device, whether it's manufactured by Amazon or Google or whoever, you are accepting that you no longer own that information that you speak into that device. Data is more valuable than the hardware, right? So over time, those manufacturers will learn usage trends, buying trends, shopping trends, transportation trends. That's where the value is. So the question that I would ask to leaders in the room is, shouldn't that information be ours as consumers? And shouldn't we have the right to monetize that information and sell it if we want, or protect it in the manner in which we want to do it? And that in itself will be the biggest revolution or change in IoT at the consumer level. So the other part of that is data integrity. And there's multiple levels of the data integrity. One is, how are we assured that the information that's being transmitted through IoT devices to the cloud or the fog or to the mist and is being pushed back down to us through analytics is valid information, right? What's the accuracy and what's the validity of that information? Because we as business leaders and consumers are going to manage our lives in the future based on the information. So how are we assured of the validity and accuracy of that? The second part is, not all cloud-hosted services are created equal. So if our information is going to a cloud-hosted service, and that cloud-hosted service may not be as reputable as some others, how secure is that information on a second-rate or third-rate or fourth-rate cloud service, right? So when we bank, we're concerned with the quality of the bank, the insurability of the bank, and the physical integrity of the bank. We need to be same level of interest, same level of security with IoT information because it's our information. And then battery-operated IoT devices. Many, many IoT devices today are battery-operated. So if we go from 3 billion connected devices to 40 billion connected devices, we're creating a bit of a maintenance nightmare for ourselves. And what if we're dependent on that particular IoT device for a very valid bit of information to conduct our economic, business, personal lives, and that battery fails? Where are we, right? And many times we don't know where those devices are. So I'd like, Marcel, we doing okay on time? So any questions, comments? I know ending with the challenges is a little bit probably on the negative side, but it's really important to me to do that. So somebody's hand's coming up.
A government. I don't know if it's government or whoever.
The question had to do with cybersecurity of devices. My own worst enemy here, sorry. So the question had to do with cybersecurity. Who's responsible for the security of that information, and how is that being regulated today, in a nutshell? And it is regulated, but it's not regulated. So we do business with companies, and we trust those companies to have the utmost of cybersecurity stringent policies in place. There are, in the cybersecurity world, there are policies and there are policies in place that regulate what that is, but there are no policies in place that regulate that every company that's doing data storage has to follow that. So that's kind of the scary notion. So Microsoft, AWS, IBM, Google, right there, they are major cloud hosters, and they follow very, very stringent cybersecurity regulations, and they monitor that on a daily basis. But a company that's just starting up and strapped for cash might use somebody that's not following those cybersecurity regulations, or somebody that's storing in a cloud offshore from the United States, which may not follow those same regulations. So your question is, who's responsible for that? That's kind of the core of the IoT issue right now relative to data security. There are no standards in the IoT space. There is an IoT alliance. It's an industry alliance that is formed to try to get a handle on regulating that internally without government oversight. And there are major worldwide players involved. That slide that I had up, most of those players are involved in the alliance, and we'll get there. But today, so let me give you an example. Today there are probably 6, 7 communication platforms used by IoT providers. Each one of those has its own inherent benefits and its own inherent risks. And until the industry can agree on what those standards need to be, we're in a bit of a position of vulnerability. No greater vulnerability. So industry manages their own, right? They don't use third-party clouds for the most part. Utilities don't use third-party clouds for the most part. Agriculture usually don't use third-party clouds. Consumer devices is really where I see the risk right now. So that answer the question?
From a worldwide perspective, how is Siemens going up against countries like China, Russia, India, who have their own norms for the internet? And are you just picking low-hanging fruit right now, Siemens, just based on the United States system?
That's an excellent question. Siemens, from an IoT manufacturing standpoint, is most deeply involved in IoT at the machine-to-the-machine level, not at the consumer level. The business that I'm engaged in is intelligent infrastructure. So I work in smart city space, smart urban centers. And so in my course of business, I'm primarily using non-Siemens IoT devices and integrating those together. So the issues of data integrity, data storage, cybersecurity are probably more prevalent in my day-to-day work than in the Siemens side. So the industry, machine to machine, are normally stored on industry-owned protected servers, and that's pretty well locked down. And that's really Siemens' forte in the IoT industry. That answer the question?
Hi, I'm Marianne McAuliffe, and your last section, you were talking about the challenges of IoT and how do we solve these problems and what groups solve these problems. And you suggested, maybe government, that those are polar opposites, and that's probably not the right direction. But yeah, it's an exciting time. It's very exciting to think what's going to happen, how our lives are going to transform for the better. And one of the groups I think that should be involved are artists and designers, and as they see our world in a very intimate and different way. And if they were part of this conversation, just think how our lives could be better. All these devices and things that we touch and wear and walk through will consider our human condition in a different way. I heard that in Dubai, which has, I guess, a lot, they're advanced in the IoT.
Yeah.
There's like an example, a street corner where you're walking down the street corner and you're at the corner and facial recognition, it's reading your face to see if it's pleasant because they wanted it to be beautiful, and they're tweaking it to make it beautiful for that human being. So, I mean, there's so much exciting things happening in it, and so that role, artists and designers, they need to be a part of this, I think, part of solving these problems.
So I'll freely admit, I'm a recovering engineer, and I would have never thought about that. So thank you for that. My mind would have never gone there. It's a great contribution. Thank you.
You mentioned that there's no real true smart cities in the United States. So what are some of the other leaders other than Dubai that the cities in the United States will be looking to as an example as they take the first steps to become smart cities?
So Everybody has a slightly different definition of a smart city. I personally don't really care for the term smart city because it doesn't carry a definition with it. I like to use the term connected city. There are some examples around the world that I use as kind of thought leadership for those connected cities. One of them is a district in Vienna, Austria that's called the Aspern District, A-S-P-E-R-N. If anybody in the room is a student of history, I think it was Aspern, the land in Aspern in 1809 was the first place that Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated. It's that land, and it's a district that's being redeveloped in Austria. Everything is connected. So a little tidbit on that. The country of Austria has completely deregulated electric utilities. So the consumer can choose, or commercially, industrially, or consumer can choose what electric provider they want to use. The problem that they had in Aspern that they were trying to overcome was it's great to have choices, but if you only know what your consumption is after the fact, then it really doesn't do you much good in making behavioral decisions. So throughout the entire community, every commercial building, institutional building, and residential environment is monitored with real-time electrical usage, and you can use an app and switch utility providers on the fly. Another example of a smart city, although it's an urban center, and I see around the world more smart development, if you will, in urban centers than in cities, only because they're bite-sized pieces. So the West 2nd Street development here in Reno is intended to be just that. An example of that is an area of London called Silvertown Quays, which is on the Thames River. It's the area in London that all of the grain of the UK used to go there. It was milled, processed, and then distributed, and they're redeveloping that into a millennial live-work-play village. That's a great example. Everything is connected, all app-controlled, distributed energy solutions. It's pretty advanced. The other example I'd come up with in the United States is a development in Colorado called Sterling Ranch, and it's the first gigabit community in the state of Colorado. It's a privatized private network. Every home and every business will get a minimum of a gig of service. The community environment is connected to the home environment, which is connected to the commercial environment. I wouldn't venture that it's a complete connected environment, but it's more connected than anything else. China and the Arab world are actually really advanced in connected communities as well. I'm just not as familiar with those as the ones in Western Europe. How are we doing on time? I'm done. Thank you very much. Great questions, great audience.